Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Philanthropy. Today we have a guest, somebody that I have worked with and respected for 2 years, 3 years now, and I'm very excited to have him on. I'm introducing Dean Gamble. He was my guidance counselor when I was a principal for the last 2 years in Onion Lake, and he is going to be talking with us today about grief. And it's been a little bit that I've been trying to get him on. I think since I started talking about this podcast last year, I've been trying to get him to talk about grief with me. And we've had a few really good conversations. And of course, in the work that we did together, I know how strong he is in this area. And that's why I really thought he would be such an amazing person to have on the podcast. So I'll give everybody a little bit of background. When we were working together, we had a lot of deaths in the community where we worked, and especially last year, there were just an insane amount of deaths were happening, just one after another. I can remember a stretch of where we had 1 to 3 deaths in the community like every single week for months. It was really excruciating on the students and on the staff and the whole community. And so we had to do a lot of work to support people who were grieving. And something that, this came really naturally to Dean, and I'll get him to talk about that in a minute, but something that I was really, proud about was that he brought up this idea of a Blue Christmas series. That was a couple of years ago, and we did it 2 years in a row. And so for the Blue Christmas series, we, had a giant auditorium, and we would have different sessions, and Dean can talk about that. We had different sessions every single day, and we encouraged any students or any staff who were struggling with grief to come to those sessions and really try and unpack their grief before we left them to go off on the holidays, because of course grief really hits hard at Christmas time. And so that was something that we did successfully for 2 years, and it was really well received by the students and the staff. And so that's why I knew, if I wanted to talk about grief, I had to do it with Dean. I knew he would be probably one of the best people to do that. So I'm gonna let you start talking, Dean, and just give us a little bit of background about how this happened for you. That grieving was something that became maybe something that you had to experience and that you had to push through, and the lessons that you learned as a result of that.
Okay. Yeah, I'm a little nervous the first time, but I guess I guess the biggest thing about grief for myself is I've only started in my late 40s to understand what it's done to me, how it's affected me, and the person I became because of a lot of the grief that I wasn't dealing with. So, like the Blue Christmas is something that I remember being a youth at that age and losing a grandfather. And I guess the biggest thing about that was it affected me throughout all my life. It's been 35 years I've lost my mushum. And one of the things about that is my body always let me know that time of the year, my behaviors and a lot of the things that happened in this time, which is February 2nd, and about 2 weeks leading up to that time, because of the death of my mushum. He was my mentor. My late mushum was a counselor in the PA penitentiary. He helped a lot of people, and he was somebody that was a big part of my life, and it really affected me, and I didn't know that until later in my life. So the Blue Christmas is something that, for myself, it allows myself to actually heal during that time as well, sharing my stories, and also to help the youth. And that's the biggest thing, is I know the effects of the grief, the loss of a lot of my family members and what it's done to me. So I'll leave it at that for now. And I'm kind of excited. I kind of felt emotion. I felt emotion. I guess one of the biggest emotions right now is it's it's going on 8 years. October on October 25th will be 8 years that I lost my dad, and 3 months prior to that, I lost my mom. And the biggest thing about is today is their 52nd anniversary, so it's kind of the emotions. It's all about emotions that trigger us. Our body reacts to the grief. So I'll leave it with that for now.
Well, thank you for that. And I don't know if you're planning to have another Blue Christmas series this year again. Are you thinking about something like that again?
Oh, it's in the talks with the school right now, and I'm pretty sure we will. And I'll just leave it at that for now. So
Yeah. Okay, well, that's really good. And of course, I mean, I understand that sometimes there's changes when you have changes in leadership. And so sometimes, there are different plans and things that happen. And so I really understand that. But I know when we had been, talking about this podcast, you had sent over this cute video, and this was a video that we had showed to the students just to help them understand the stages of grief, and it's pretty. I mean, it's kind of comical, right? And it's supposed to, I guess,
yeah,
soften the blow a little bit. That it's a really tough process when you're grieving. And so this video, it's about a giraffe that undergoes like all 5 stages of the grief process, and I'll post it onto the links and stuff for this podcast when it airs, in case anybody's interested in watching that video. But I do think that it does a really great job kind of explaining what you can go through when you're experiencing grief. And these 5 stages, I believe they come from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And so there are 5 stages. So there is denial,
Niall.
and there's anger, and there's bargaining, and depression, and acceptance. So those are the 5 stages. And I think that the stages can be very different for people. Like sometimes you're maybe even experiencing a couple of them at one time, but you can go back and forth. There's not really like a logical order that they fall into, and so you can go kind of all over the place with those stages of grief through the grieving process. And I heard somewhere that sometimes we never really finish grieving. I don't know how do you feel about that?
Well, it's like I was talking about with my mushroom, right? It's been 35 years, and absolutely, I still grieve him. My body still reacts to that time of the year, but it's acknowledging it, and I know for myself. There was a release in 2019 for that, because I was grieving my parents, and it was for 2 years, right? So and I became a workaholic. So somewhere in there was a dream that a coworker of mine had and needed to come and share with me that I was going through things. I was going through a lot of emotions, and I picked up an addiction back. I picked up an old addiction back, and so I went through a lot of things in that time. And anyways, I was home alone at the time, and my coworker had called, and she said, I had this dream of you and of this old man and this little boy. And she said, I need to come and share it with you. So I was home alone. She come and shared it, and it was it was 2 stages in my life that she saw. And the first stage was when I was a little boy. She saw me in a house. She explained the house, and the old man was saying, "See this little boy right there? He took the longest time to wipe his ass. And that was a saying that my mushroom used to always say to me, because I didn't get things right away, right? And well, I'm just that's a lot of my coping mechanisms that I've come with. So, and but then it moved from that dream. It moved from in that house to I owned a white truck before, and she said you guys were both sitting in there having a cigarette, and he said, you tell him for me that that I'm proud of him and I've always been here with him throughout all these years. And whenever he's driving in this vehicle and he's asking me questions, I'm there with him. So, it was a big release for me to understand that how much effect the loss of my mushroom had in my life, and then it was also my belief is that was his way of making room for me so I can grieve my mom and dad. In 2017, this happened. By 2019, actually December 22nd of 2019, I basically hit rock bottom in an addiction, trying to be a workaholic and everything, and hiding my life. And I wasn't grieving my parents. I lost them 3 months apart. The biggest thing about that is with my with my dad, we were waiting for him. He was given a certain amount of time to live, and my mom was, so what, I thought she was healthy, and then she died of a massive heart attack on July 9th of that same year. And so it was really a time where I don't know what it did to me, but I know it got me into old habits, and it got me to that place where I've always associated death and everything together, and I became that person. And it was it was an eye opener, and it all my grief has always been eye openers to understand that, what, that I really have to deal with it, and so do our youth. And that's why Blue Christmas is there, because nobody teaches us how to grieve,
Yep.
like, and there is no way, and it never leaves you, like I grieve my parents. Like today it's like their anniversary, and I really feel them today. It's something that I learned to understand myself. And I think that's something that you understand about me is I'm such a deep thinker when it comes to my emotions, trying to figure out where everything comes from. So today is an emotional day. But it's kind of good we're talking about this, and I'm talking about it because it's always a part of my healing to talk about my grief.
Right. I think that's it's kind of serendipitous that it happened today that we're having this podcast on grief. And and of course I had no idea this was your parents' anniversary, and and you agreed. I'm happy you didn't cancel on me, and if you had, for that reason, I would have understood definitely. But I think that's really powerful what you said about how we need to really face our grief, right? That we need to really
Mm-hmm.
sit with it. Because I know you had mentioned, a couple times that you sometimes tried to, I guess, numb yourself out by losing yourself in addictions or through work. And I think, like, my understanding of grief is that it waits for you. It doesn't go away until you address it, right? And so I think and that's true for a lot of emotions, but I do know that that's true for the grieving process. And I know that, like, as Indigenous people, sometimes we have compounded grief, that there's a lot of loss at once, which is what we saw, of course, in the school last year, in the community.
Mm-hmm.
And especially for, like, Indigenous people, I've noticed that there tends to be a lot of really violent deaths. And I remember actually myself going through therapy one time, and I had gone to therapy for the breakdown of my marriage, and my counselor had said, okay, but we need to go back and address, all of the little traumas and all of the big traumas in your life. And so, we kind of worked through some of that. And then, when I had given her all the information, she's like, Jess, there's a lot of death that you need to process that I think that you haven't processed. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she had said, well, your late aunt who had died, and then your cousin who had died by suicide, and then you had two friends who were murdered. And she's like, and she's like, you need to process all of this. This is all contributing to why your marriage is probably in the state that it is. And, for me, that was a huge eye opener. And I remembered thinking, like, wow, you don't realize how much it can impact all of the relationships in your life. And so, of course, I committed to doing the work and sitting with her. And I know that something that held me back in my grieving journey, where I couldn't like move beyond, like I was stuck in a stage, was this feeling that I could somehow have prevented the deaths, right? And especially the deaths, that were really violent, like my cousin who died by suicide. I felt that I should have said or done something to intervene. And then my friends also who died by murder, that there were things that I should have done, I should have, and it's having that feeling that somehow actions that you did or didn't do contributed to those deaths. And for me, that was the case, that I had to, really, she had to really work with me and say, you know what, Jess, you probably did all that you could do, and you didn't know that this would happen. And, it's almost like that moment in, what's that movie with Matt Damon, and he's that genius math guy, the one with the apples.
Okay.
I know. I always do
Yeah,
this. I'll think of a movie or a title of something and I can't think of it. And of course, later tonight I'll remember the title of it.
yeah.
But maybe when you're talking, I'll Google it. But in any case, in that movie, the guy hugs him and he starts crying, and it's a real powerful moment. And he's like, "It's not your fault. It's not your fault." And I had to really, myself embrace that thought that it wasn't my fault that these people had died, and that there wasn't something that I could have done to miraculously save their life. And especially if you have a spiritual kind of leaning, then sometimes we can feel that there are things that unfortunately they happen, but creator's involved in that, and we can't always intervene and do things because it was maybe something that needed to happen, and it's tough to accept that. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, it's always definitely tough, something that's tough to go through, right? It's like, we I don't know how to explain grief. I really don't. I just feel I'm such a I'm actually a professional when it comes to it, because I've been through so much grief, and since 2017, that like I lost a lot of favorite uncles, that I grew up with, just recently. I lost a couple of my favorite aunties, a lot of big losses, that some of the people that grew up with me, and my parents in 2017, and my aunties and uncles I talk about. And then within a 1 year span, I lost my baby sister to a drug overdose. Then I lost my only brother, my only blood brother, to a sickness, which was 3 months after that. And then probably about a year after that, I lost my middle sister to a sickness as well. So this is all times that I've been working and doing things and trying to understand, like, what the heck is really going on with me, because grief is so complicated. You talk about the compound grief, like it's one after another. I guess for myself, the biggest thing is to acknowledge myself, to understand that what it does to me, what it does to my body, what emotions it brings out, the anger, the crave to the old addictions, because it was always something that numbed me, but I've watched myself destroy myself and people around me because I wasn't dealing with my grief in a healthy way. And I didn't know how. I remember back when I was probably about 14 years old, I lost an uncle and I was a pallbearer. And I always remember my uncle saying when they were putting the ribbon on my arm, right? I always remember him telling me, men don't cry. And, and the saddest thing, I've always had that mentality. I grew up around these kind of men that didn't know how to grieve, didn't know how to talk about these things. And and it ate me up. It ate me up because I was a pallbearer at my Muslim's funeral, and there's me, at 16 years old trying to act like a man and not feel and people telling me, like I got to be strong. So so those kind of teachings, I honestly just hate them with a passion, because it doesn't teach nothing. It teaches us to hide our emotions. It teaches us to hide our feelings,
Yeah.
and it destroys people. Like, let's go back to February. How I'm married a second time, and I lost my first marriage in that month, in the month of February. And how many times prior to that we had breakups within that month. It was always something inside of me that I didn't even know what was going on. And and I remember one time going to a treatment center, and we were talking about grief and stuff like that, and we did this exercise. It was crazy for them to tell me that I had so much anger towards my late Mushum because he left me. I felt abandoned. I I couldn't at that time. I couldn't accept that I was angry with this man that I love. That I loved all my life, and I didn't know I had that anger inside of me. I became a violent I became a violent man after that. I The person I became after all the grief is not somebody I'm proud of. But one thing I'm proud of is that I've gotten through it. I've learned to deal with what the real cause of all my pain, all my grief, all the hurts, all the loneliness, all the anger that it this was all a part of that. And learning to understand myself now, and to learning to grieve properly, which I call properly for myself. And I don't ever try to tell anybody how to grieve, but
How do you do it?
how do
What do
I
you,
do it?
yeah, what do you do that you feel is proper for you that's maybe not going to addictions?
Mm, well, the loss of my parents, I can't say what I did, but I know what I'm doing, because the loss of my parents, I thought I was okay. I was going to school for mental health and addictions, right? I was going to school. I was learning stuff about myself. And what do, I the question again was, what do I do?
Yeah, personally.
Uh, there's a lot of things I do. February comes around. I start preparing myself in mid-January. I prepare myself mid-January to understand what I'm going to go through. So when the time hits, I'm aware. If I get angry for some unknown reason, maybe it's the addiction side of me, the old addiction side of me, where I want to get angry just so I can take off and get into that addiction. But now I'm aware that all this is related to my grief. And the same thing with my parents. I became a coke addict again 2 years later. I lost everything 2 years after I lost my parents. It's it's that what I go through is something that I understand. I went through it to understand where I am today, if that makes sense, and how to deal with things, to understand what's really going on.
Yeah, I think that's really really amazing that you recognize now, through this process that, I need to take the time to prepare myself in January because I know how emotional February is going to be for me. And then also during February, I think you touched on it where you talked about how, it's really important for men especially to tune into their emotions and allow those emotions to come out, to feel them, to process them, because I do think that there is a very big link to suicide and men having to bottle their emotions. I think that is a huge link. And I know that was something that, of course, when I was at, Sagaskuch with you, that I definitely, encouraged our young boys when they were in my office and, they were upset about something that, even if dad is in the office here with us, even if uncle is in the office here with us, it's okay for you to cry. You were given emotions just like every female on this earth. And you were given those emotions by Creator to help you tune into this world, to tune into relationships, your relationship with others, and these are really powerful tools for us. So we shouldn't be suppressing them. And so I love that you give yourself that space to feel your emotions, and then also to forgive yourself when you know, hey, I'm probably going to be angry this month, and maybe even that if for other people who are listening right now, that they maybe even reach out to the people around them and say, hey, could you just be a little bit more patient with me this month, because I know that I'm going to be going through a lot, and if I kind of act out, if I say anything that's a little bit rude or hurtful, I know that's out of character for myself. And I'm also struggling internally just to keep things together. And so if I, am a little bit ruder, I'm apologizing in advance, but I want you to understand to not take it personally, because I'm going to be going through something, and, I would love your support and your patience at that time. But I know that was something that I recall having to do this with one of the teachers last year, that, this teacher was struggling with a student, and I had to sit down with the teacher and say, hey, you know what, the student just lost a key member in their family and they're going through a lot, and if they are acting out in your class, let's offer them a little bit more grace and compassion, because we acknowledge that they're going through a tough time. And that's not to condone abusive behavior, of course, but to understand that sometimes people are not at their best, and there's a reason for that, and grief can be a big part of that, right?
Yes, absolutely. It's it's a tough awareness for somebody that's going through grief that doesn't understand too, and like one of the biggest things that you hear people when you talk about grief and stuff, well, like, well, I don't know why they're doing it like that. I didn't do that, or
Yeah.
how come they're acting that way? What, like, they shouldn't be acting like that. It's it's things like that that why our youth and myself, for example, growing up, is I didn't know how to talk about them because I wasn't allowed to. I wasn't allowed to talk about feelings growing up, right? So, and but then you have people who made it through, live healthy lives, that they may seem they live like healthy life, but they're not dealing with their shit. And I'm sorry I said it like that, but
Yeah.
I feel that a lot of people hurt a lot of people because they think just because they made it that they have that strength. They have that, I don't know how to say it, but they have the right to tell somebody this is how you should do it because look at, I made it through it, right? And a lot of people get lost in that mentality when it comes to even getting an education, and some youth go through so much, right? But it's always grief. And right now within the school, I talk to a lot of youth that are grieving, and one of the questions I always ask the youth is, when you lost your mushum, or you lost your kukum, or your family broke up, do you remember the time of the year? And the funny thing about it is they do. not funny, but
Yeah.
they, they're so aware. Once I start to pinpoint those with people to understand their emotions and where they're coming from, and I try to help them through it, I think it opens a lot of eyes for them to really draw near to the people they lost and to understand what to do in those times. Like I have so much feedback from students that go out and do things that I've asked them to do in those times that would help them, and they come back, they feel better.
Like what kinds
Because
of things?
well, a lot of them, I encourage them to go sit down outside and talk to them. If they smoked, light up a cigarette and talk to them, man, and or write them a letter like how hurt and stuff you are, and then burn it. A lot of little things that I've learned that I just use, right? They either they work or they don't, but the biggest thing is I don't tell them how to grieve. I just tell them to feel it and to talk it out, is because I never shut them down to this is how you should do it. This is what helps, is the way I go about things. I don't. I've learned so many ways. I grew up in Christianity. I've stopped drinking through going through sweats and ceremony. I've done a lot of things in my life that helped me through, and so I don't have one way to help you stop grieving. My biggest thing too when it comes to grieving is what I tell everybody is, talk about it. They're there. Talk to somebody. Understand what's going on in your life. Why your body feels this way. Why you feel so sad. And the thing about it is they come in the time of the year that they lost somebody, and they just want to talk about them. And they want to talk about people. Their bodies know. Our young people are so strong today in talking about these things. That's what I love about that. Like I always I wish I was in high school in your time, because I have people that understand what's actually going on and they talk about it now. So
That's really powerful, and I think that's really important. That you mentioned your spirituality. Your Christianity, your faith. I do think for myself that is a huge and major support that got me through my grief, and to understand really that grief, well, not grief, but death is like the most natural process too, right? Like how it happens sometimes is kind of the brutal part that we struggle with. And the fact that it can be very, very sudden and we're not prepared for it, and then you can, add in that shock factor sometimes that makes it a little bit harder to deal with, just because you didn't see it coming. But I know for myself that, having that relationship with Creator has helped me so much to understand that, what, life is really temporary for every single person around us, and this is a little bit morbid, but I just moved into this new place, and I was walking down to the basement, and there's this kind of like this little nook, like a little cranny, and somebody was like writing graffiti in there, and I noticed it, and it said, "To whoever is reading this, you're going to die." And I saw it and I was like, wow. Like, I'm assuming it's probably like maybe a teenager going through an emo phase. I really don't know. But, when I really thought about those words, I was like, you know what? That's actually really true. Like, I read it and I will die. Like, I understand that, we have this mortality. And I think that sometimes we forget that with the people around us, that they're, that we only have so much time with every single person on this earth. And I think, just understanding that for myself personally, it's added a richness to my life. Like, I have a tattoo right here. It's called Memento Mori. I have a lot of tattoos, but this one right here, Memento Mori, I heard it from a talk from Ariana Huffington, and she had mentioned it's a Latin phrase and it means remember death. And the reason that I have it is to remind me that death is coming. You know that it's coming for other people, it's coming for myself, and it's not to be morbid or grim or like I don't celebrate death. I mean, obviously it is a part of life, but at the same time, it helps me to acknowledge just the briefness of my relationships with everybody, and we take them for granted. I think that can be the real struggle. Like, I know when my late dad died, and that was in 2013, and we had a real tense relationship quite often because our personalities were so similar. And so because of that, when he died, and he had been terminally ill, so I knew it was coming, and I spent that time with him before he died, and I was grateful for that it wasn't a sudden death. But nevertheless, we're never ready for anybody to die.
Yeah.
And then when he died, now there's so many things about that relationship that just ended and weren't resolved. They weren't resolved in the way that would have been healing for me. So now the relationship has ended because he passed away, but I still have to go to therapy and process, and now I have to do it alone. I can't see the relationship improve like it
Hmm.
could potentially with other people. It's just gone. And I think for myself, that was a tough one for me, a tough lesson to learn, that now I would have to do that work all alone, and but of course, having that spirituality, having that faith, allows me to feel, that he's still with me. And so, like, I think some of these healing methods that you're mentioning, like, writing these letters, prayer, I think these sorts of things can help to process some of that grief, and feel that, maybe they're not with us in life right now, but maybe still with us in person or in spirit, right?
Hmm.
So, what are some more things? Because I know when we had the Blue Christmas series that there were different kind of presenters and different topics. Do you recall some of the things that maybe you did to help set the kids up so that they were ready for Christmas and being alone? And I would like to acknowledge that I found it to be very successful. The kids really reached out and said this was very beneficial to them and helpful to them, and got them through the holidays. But do you remember some of the things maybe that you did and talked about during those times?
Well, most of the things I can remember is like the after when they came to me, taught like after everything was done, each session was done daily. The talks were, it's like they started preparing themselves for that time. They were ready. They understood what was going to happen, how they were going to feel, and I think just that preparation, that they understood inside of themselves that needed to be done, is one of the biggest things that for myself is I find to be a success. And I don't think I'm ever going to help anybody to stop grieving, but I'm always going to help them to get through that grieving, because I still go through it. And I that's those are things that I can remember. But some of the biggest things, like compared from year one when we did it, we had that we had it, and then to the second year. Well, in the second year, what really blew my mind is I knew we had staff the year prior to that weren't dealing with certain losses. They because I saw the losses that they had, recent losses, the grief they were going through, and a lot of them didn't attend. And in the second year, there was like three, four of them that shared their story in front of to the students. So things like that is for myself is the biggest things that I get out of it is that we're not in this alone, that we can't be in this alone. We need people in our lives to go through this. We can't pretend it's not there. We can't do what our families are doing. Like a lot of the students in a lot of First Nations, when they see grief, they're the ones who are forgotten, because a lot of the parents, they have the old habits what I saw growing up, where my aunties and uncles, if we lost somebody, it was big parties, a lot of drinking. That's how they coped with it. So for myself, I just to get it out there, to understand that they're not alone is the biggest thing, because grief is the damn hardest thing I've ever dealt with, and I continue to deal with. That's why I say I feel I'm a professional at it, because I've been through so much since 2017. It's so unreal, and sometimes I have to remind myself that I'm bullshitting myself, that that I'm I'm not okay, you know, and I gotta acknowledge that, and then that's where I have friends. I have I have friends. I got like maybe two friends that I can reach out to, and that's all I
Three.
need.
Count me.
Okay, three. But yeah, it's there's people out there that really actually care about grief, and there's not those, because a lot of us get tired of hearing that I guess I'll say the colonial ways of saying, you got to get over it, life goes on. I think those are the worst things to say to anybody that's grieving,
Yeah.
regardless of if it's compounded, or if it's whatever stage they are in grief. Like I can go through those same five stages of grief over and over and over and over,
Yep.
and I understand that. It's not okay. This is past, and now I can move on to the next one.
Right.
No, it's just when it decides to hit, it hits.
Right.
And those are the times, if you're not aware of it, and somebody close to you is going through something of the same thing, that's where relationships can be ruined. Like you said it. Like you had to deal with your past when you lost your marriage, right?
Yep.
It's like that. It's all this stuff comes from somewhere, and we got to understand where it's coming from, and we got to understand who we are and how to grieve. It's like, man, when I turn into a little baby when I grieve, and I grieve by myself, and that's what I'm grateful for. Like I turn into a little baby and I can go cry, but I don't do it around people, because that's still that mentality of my
Society.
uncles.
Yep.
Yeah, the uncles telling me that men don't cry. So now I have this whenever there's a funeral, because I'm one of the oldest, and you saw that I tend to a lot of the funerals in my community
Yep.
when it comes to my immediate family, because I'm one of the oldest. And one of the things that I always tell the young people, and my nieces and nephews, my grandchildren, because I have a ton of them, and the first thing I always tell them, when people tell you to be strong, that's a bunch of bullshit. That's what I
Yep.
tell them. Don't listen to that. You don't have to be strong. This is our time. This is your time to grieve what we're going through, and you grieve.
Yep.
And and if you gotta cry, you damn cry. Wherever you are, you cry. You don't have to go hide it.
Yep.
These are real feelings, and this is the way I teach my family now. So I don't know. It's for myself. It's grieving and understanding grieving is my own personal experiences, and the damage it's done to my past. But it's created me to who I am today. So I had to be that ugly person when I was grieving. I I threw away everything. I lost just about everything every single time. And I didn't understand. I just thought that, my mom dropped me when I was a kid, and I was just messed in the head. It's like, it's that's what I always believed. I didn't know where it was coming from, but to know where it's coming from today is is a good thing. And if it's anything that I can give to anybody today, is to really understand grief, your own way of understanding it, and to
Yep.
acknowledge your feelings. Your body doesn't BS you when you're going through things.
Yep.
Like today, today, knowing that this day is this day, I feel that I feel lonely today. I feel, my sisters went to Nazareth last night. my only three sisters, my family that's left in my family. They went to Nazareth in Edmonton, and I told them I'm doing a podcast, but I'm trying to get them to stop in and visit for half hour. Like hoping they stop in because I think I need them today. And it's things like that, like this doing this podcast today, this recording
Yeah.
is it's everything's always meant to happen at certain times, and
Yeah.
so I'm understanding myself today, not to the greatest, but I'm doing better. I'm not sitting in a bar, you know. I'm
Yep.
not. So so that just got me thinking. Okay, let's go back to when I we buried the day we buried my dad in 2017. We, my brother, my sisters, and myself, we went to our old house where we grew up. One of my sisters lives in there now, and we we decided to have drinks with our kids. So I drank that time, and I was pretty angry that time, and a lot of emotion came out in alcohol, and that was basically the last time I kind of stopped. I stopped going to. I went to wakes, but I stopped going to funerals. For myself, I had to stop myself because I associated funerals with drinking because it's something that I always did, and it's something that I followed with my aunties and uncles and my family growing up, and it's something I had to pull myself away from for many years to go to stop going to funerals because I knew for what it did to me as a person, right? And I knew what it did to emotionally, mentally, everything it did to me always led to me wanting to have that drink.
Yep.
So I kept myself from going to a lot of funerals. I didn't go to a couple of my aunties and uncles' funerals just just in that time because I didn't want to go. I didn't want to feel I needed to drink. So I'd just go to the wake, and then out of respect, I'd go there, and then I'd leave, and I wouldn't show up to the funerals. It's just something that for myself, I had to do.
Mm.
I feel I had to do, but grief really makes a person, I don't know how to say it, but makes a person just become somebody that they think is a normal person. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's funny. Like I say, I talk about grief and I'm dealing with it, but I still have my moments where I realize I'm BSing myself about my grief, and I think I'm okay. And I think that's where we need to get out of that and try and understand that no, we're not okay. No, we haven't dealt with it, you know? Because if it keeps surfacing every now and then you're not done dealing with it. That's why I say it never goes away. So I'm just babbling on.
No, I think you said some really powerful things, and I think that I really love that you mentioned checking in with yourself. That making sure that you're being honest about how you're feeling. That and then there's that level of checking in with yourself because you'll know if you are bullshitting yourself. So you have to be honest and say, you know what, if
Hmm.
I'm struggling, then I need to be honest about that. And maybe there are things that I need to do to support my mental health, my emotional health. And you mentioned some really key things, and one of them was about relationships, right? I really
Hmm.
loved that you said we need to remember that yes, we have lost somebody, and maybe it's been a few people compounded,
Yeah.
but we're not alone. There's still a lot of people around us, and there are people who love us and want to support us. And and we need to be able to reach out to those people when we're struggling, because people love to help and they love to offer assistance. And if you I think find yourself in a situation where maybe that's not the case. Maybe you have a lot of family or friends who are, stuck in their own toxicity. Maybe they're unhealed. Then you definitely have professional people you can reach out to. And there's a lot of, Indigenous people, I think, that are really embracing their healing right now. Like, sobriety is a really big movement. And I really, think it's such a beautiful thing that people are doing what it takes to step away from those active addictions, which definitely interfere with that process and make things worse, right? Like, let's be honest, if we are numbing ourselves out and we turn to addictions, the amount of drama that we're adding, because now some of that, maybe unprocessed anger is coming out in your addictions, or poor decisions, that break up families.
Absolutely.
And so, to know yourself so well that, what, I'm gonna step away from going to the funerals because I know for myself where I'm gonna end up if I do that. And I don't wanna do that, but I don't want to be disrespectful to the family, so I'll go to the wake and at least, support the family and let them know that, I do care and pay my respects to, this person who has passed away, but also to understand that there are a lot of people who are not processing their grief in a good and healthy way. And these, and if you're going to addictions, it means you're, turning away from that processing. And exactly what you said, we need to feel it to heal it, right? We need to actually tap into those emotions. And I really love that you said, that this be strong mentality is total garbage, because I 100% agree with that. I'm not a fan of, when somebody dies and everybody says be strong for the family. What you're really doing is you're silencing their grief. You're not giving them permission to process what they need to process. You're telling them to bottle it up. And when we bottle it up, that's when we see all these, behaviors happening, where people now, maybe they go into depression, maybe they go to suicide, maybe they go into active addiction, because that's energy, right? Like, when we are grieving, that is an energy that is inside of us, and we need to move it out in a healthy way. And I think, if you're allowing those emotions, tapping into your emotions however you can, whether it's through writing, whether it's through prayer, or allowing yourself to just sit and cry privately, or, yoga, meditation, whatnot. There are lots of things that you can do to just allow this energy out. And I think that's a really key thing, that people, are not giving themselves permission. Or, I think a big part of it too is that we sometimes are very uncomfortable with feelings that aren't like happy and socially acceptable, that we could ugly cry. And now we're so afraid that, somebody's going to be looking at me because I'm ugly crying and there's snot and, like that kind of thing. And so we're afraid to show that vulnerable side to people. And you know what? We need to be okay with uncomfortable emotions. And even though
Absolutely.
it's not fun. Anger is not fun. Sadness is not fun. But these are, definitely, tools for us to understand and unpack that, what, this person meant a lot to me. And right now I'm struggling because they're just suddenly gone from my life. And I miss them, right? Like, just saying that is really, it's tough to do. It's tough to acknowledge that we could just be missing somebody that meant a lot to us, right?
Absolutely. And I'd rather cry than be that angry man I used to be. So it's a win-win for everybody around me, I guess, and that's the biggest thing.
Yep,
So,
absolutely. I think that's really powerful. And then I'm just going to bring up, there was, you had sent me this photo about 4 types of complicated grief. So let's unpack these 4 types of complicated grief. And I'll just read this message that you sent me. So the 4 types of complicated grief are chronic grief, where grief is prolonged and doesn't subside; delayed grief, where the emotional response to a loss is postponed, exaggerated grief, which involves intense reactions like self-destructive behavior, and masked grief, where individuals experience symptoms of grief through other behaviors without realizing they are connected to the loss. And these types often hinder a person's ability to function normally. What are your thoughts on that?
Uh, wh- when you were reading them, I could just picture myself in certain situations in my life when I was going through them.
Yeah.
So I can see, like the mass grief where individuals experience symptoms of grief through other behaviors without realizing they're connected to the loss, right?
Yeah.
And it's just like for example, I didn't know for years that every time February I became an alcoholic and I drank for days and I threw away everything around me in that time. It was, I didn't realize where the grief was coming from. I didn't know it was grief. I just hated winter and I hated that time of the year. That's what I thought, you know, and that destructive behaviors. Well, exactly, like exaggerated grief, like that's where things like this and knowledge like this in my past, right? And then I thought I was healing myself to understand, to know about these things and then then compared to now where I actually want to put them into actions instead of just saying them. Like I could, yeah, I became a coke addict because I lost my parents. Well, that's another bunch of BS because it goes back to how I've learned to deal with things. It has nothing to do with my parents. It's just something I've always picked up, right? And to give these to a youth, for example, if I tell them about them, well, can you just imagine a youth? I'm picturing myself, right? It's like I'm I'm using these for excuses to do what I'm doing,
Yep.
and I'm not dealing with it. And then that's the scariest thing. You give youth tools, they can spin it to something else. So whenever I give youth tools when it comes to unhealthy relationships or whatever it is, grief, man, I just tell them to not BS themselves and use this against with their partners or to use this for a reason to continue doing what you're doing. It's a scary place to be because I've been in those places where I didn't realize a lot of things that was doing was excuses. I was making excuses myself because it's how I've always dealt with things. Run. I was the best runner when it came to dealing with problems. It's like I said earlier, you know, am I really grieving properly? I don't know, but I do know is what it can cause if I don't if I'm not aware of it. What excuses can I come up with to run to that coke or to run to alcohol or to run to my old vices. I have so many old vices that it's crazy. And but to understand it and not use it for those things is a different topic altogether, right? I'm hoping through this one of my biggest goals is to be able to share my stories. I got more stories, like my stories. This is not just about grief. I've shared things with you that about my past, that why where I am today and the person I was in the past. It's like night and day sometimes.
I think that's really powerful. It's like I'm really, and then that's why I wanted you to come on this podcast and talk about grief because I know how much work you've done to transform your own life, and to also recognize and understand that, especially with grieving, there's not always an end goal, that it's a process and it continues. And, maybe we get better at it and maybe, like the pain never really goes away, but maybe we're just able to acknowledge it better and we're able to process it better as time goes on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really key, like what you said about vices. I think that's really true, that if we can recognize the vices that we lean on when we're grieving, we can also tap into some really important and valuable knowledge about ourselves and how we handle all forms of conflict in our life, because what is present when we're grieving is probably our go-to for any kind of, struggle that we're having in life. If we have a setback, if we have a conflict with somebody, if we have a vice, and maybe it's cocaine, or maybe it's, womanizing, or maybe it's alcohol, we probably go to that vice for anything that goes wrong in our life. And so it becomes this recurring pattern. And so if you're really honest about your grieving process, and that you really want, to get through this and to get through it in a good way, then you're going to have to be really honest with yourself about how you've been handling these things in your life, and maybe understanding that, if we're leaning on this addiction to get us through everything, it's creating a new set of problems for us, right? And
Absolutely.
so I think that, that's really key information for people to tap into themselves, because all we can do in this life is get better and become better humans, right? Like, I think many of us can, definitely see that when we were not aware of our, behaviors and our patterns, we were probably contributing a mess to our lives. And it's when you really start to have that, that focus and that clarity on your own life, and honesty, where we can say, hey, this is where I am right now, and not judge ourselves so harshly, like I'm a big freaking mess and there's no value to this life. If we can just be honest and say, hey, wait a minute, how can I give myself some love and compassion in this moment, that, yeah, I haven't been my best human, my best self, but I still can be, right? Like, I might be right down here in this moment, but that doesn't mean that there's no value. Because I really think that, every single person that's on this earth, Creator gave you a breath of life for a reason. And it's our task, and it's our job to take whatever our situation is and make it better for ourselves and make it better for others around us too, right? And that's, for me, that's why I have this podcast, right? Because it's really important to me that people understand we're all on a wellness journey, every single one of us. There's not one perfect human on this earth. And, so how do we give ourselves that love and that compassion to move forward in a good way, and forgive ourselves for, those times where we just haven't been our best self, but maybe we didn't know better at that time,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know that this podcast will cure everybody, but maybe it'll be, right? Maybe it'll
Yeah.
be one of those things that, a light goes off for somebody, and they go, hey, wait a minute, maybe there's some things that I could be trying, some things that I could be doing differently, and maybe, I can see that there's some value. I can see that, Dean Gamble turned his life around, and that's an inspiration. That's a motivation for me, that, here's a guy who has really experienced a lot of grief in his life, and he's still making something amazing out of his life, and he's, doing something for other people, for the youth, and maybe that's a message some people will take away, and I hope they do.
Yeah. I hope the same thing. I was wondering why I'm coming on here, what's the purpose, but like having talks about it and trying to understand what's going on. I guess that's the biggest thing for me, right? Like my biggest thing with the youth is shit. I don't want to see them go through the same garbage I went through. To do not understand what's really going on in their lives, because they're not given that opportunity to talk to you, right? And if they do fall in that, if they do fall into that trap of that grief, where if the grief takes them to where it's taken me, that's okay. Also,
Yeah.
biggest thing about with everything that came out of all those things is what led to more of my addiction was a lot of the shame and guilt for the garbage I was doing while I was, you know, either I was grieving or I was going through things in my life that I've learned to run to those vices for, right? So it's something inside of me that I don't want to see people go through that. I don't want to see people in their 40s. Well, I'm not in my 40s. I'm in my 50s. But you know, but in my 40s, I was still going through this stuff. I wasn't aware of this stuff completely. You know, I was a mess. And I lived in shame and guilt. That's why I'm not ashamed of my story. I'm not ashamed of the person I was in the past. I'm not ashamed what the grief caused me to do, because I'm taking my power back from all that shame and guilt
Good.
that I lived for all the mistakes I made. And you know, and it's something, you know, when we're talking grief, me saying something like this, if my late Musham was alive and he heard this, you know, I could see a smile on his face when he heard me say something like that, because he always wanted me to be a healthy person, and he always told everything through story. I always used to wonder why he told everything through story of something in his life or something beyond, you know, like people he worked with. But those stories hit today, you know. They've helped me to become who I am today. He was my mentor, you know. 35 years and I'm still grieving that old man. You know, he was a big part of my life. It's grief doesn't end. If you're going through it, you know, one of the biggest things that I like to ask youth, especially when they lose a grandparent, because I understand that was who probably raised them, who gave them all the advice growing up, right? Is one of the biggest things that I always ask them. What's something you'd want to ask them right now if they were here? Then they would just give me, they'd say, tell me what they want to say, right?
Yeah.
Then I always ask them, you were so close to him or her, your mushum or your kukum, that you probably know how they would answer that. And then it's like a smile goes on their face, right? So now what I'm teaching them is actually helping myself heal too with my mushum, right? Because I know how my mushum would answer a lot of the questions I asked him in the past. And so I answer because I know him so well that I always believe he's with me. And that's what I give to youth, that they're always right there. And to see that smile on these youth's face when I tell them they're always there, and they know how they'd be answered by their loss, the person they lost, it's healing for myself too. Because I believe it, you know, because seeing it in them and understanding that, because I believe it. I can go for a drive later today, you know, if I'm feeling my parents, and I can talk to them like they're here. It's something that I've learned to practice. No, I'm not freaking crazy. Maybe people will think I'm crazy.
No.
That's what I tell the youth, right? I tell the youth, no, you're not crazy.
Yeah.
You know, you need to do this. You know, because when I was a youth and somebody would tell me to talk to a dead person, I'd be like, what the hell's wrong with you? You know, it's just to make them understand.
Yeah.
Because that's how I would have saw it. Like, who the hell is going to talk to a dead person like they're there? That was my thinking as a youth.
Yeah. And I think that's really beautiful, because I do think that is still continuing that relationship, right? You're still fostering that relationship. And you know what?
Yeah.
Yes, they have died and they're not physically present, but that doesn't mean the relationship has to end. And I think that's really powerful, you know, that if you continue, like it's a really healing practice. If you continue, you know, having conversation with them, you know, putting out tobacco or some cultural practice that will help you feel connected to their spirit. I know recently it was the anniversary or the birthday of my late auntie that I was very, very close to, and so I went and had some pie for her because it was her favorite kind of pie. I don't like it; it's key lime pie, but I eat it every year on her birthday because I know how much she loved it, and for me, it's still a way to honor and celebrate her and remember her in that way. And so I think, you know, we can create these kinds of practices for ourselves that help us. And I know actually last year when we were at Sagaskuch, that was one of the projects that we had done. We did the Blue Christmas tree, remember?
Hmm.
And so we made a tree and we had it by our auditorium, and our librarian at that time had organized, this session with all of the kids, and she had ordered these like wooden ornaments, and then
Hmm.
people would sit and they would decorate an ornament in honor of a loved one who had passed away. And of course, kids were welcome to do more than one ornament. We invited family if they wanted to come in and do an ornament. And then, it was really kind of a healing session. And I know that you all had done some. A little bit of a before and after, kind of to help prepare the students, and then kind of wrap it up so that they felt that they had really honored that person who had passed away.
Hmm.
And then we hung all the ornaments on the tree, and it was just such a beautiful way to acknowledge those people who have given so much to us in their life, even though we weren't ready for them to leave us.
I like that. It was really good, and I know a lot of our youth really bear down in that time, and really put a lot of time into it. They acknowledge the person they lost, and I think that's the toughest time, because Christmas is always the toughest. That first Christmas without a loved one is always the toughest, and I think the things that we did in the school when it came to the grief was what was needed, and I think it helped us all along, including myself and the staff that I saw caring.
And that's
Hmm.
something that people could do, as a practice, even if they're not in a school setting, right?
Yeah.
If they're listening to this podcast, you could definitely do something like that in your own family and say, okay, you know what, this person who passed away this year, it's our Christmas, and it's going to be our first Christmas without them, and we're not looking forward to it, of course, but maybe as a family we could come together, and we provided counselors, just because we knew it might be a really a hard thing for some of the students. And you could do something like that. You could invite somebody in that would be a really healing presence, a counselor, an elder, somebody who could support your family that's maybe not affected, but you could do some kind of practices like that. I actually know of a family, and they had quite a few losses in their family, and so something that they had done was they kind of booked a healing retreat for themselves, because they had such a large family, and so they booked a conference room and everybody went to this hotel, and they brought in some counselors that would help this family to navigate that grief, and I thought that was such a beautiful and powerful way for this family to acknowledge that they were all struggling with this grief, and what are some things that we could do to support us as a family to get through this together. I thought that was a really great idea too.
I like that.
Well, my friend, we are nearing the end here. I think we have talked about a lot of amazing, things that could help support people who are struggling with grief, or, very soon it's going to be Christmas season. So this will be a
Hmm.
good podcast, I think, for people to listen to. Do you have any final thoughts or anything that, maybe you forgot to mention and you just want to make sure you put that out there now?
I guess one of the biggest things for grief, and I understand, because I see my family, I see my wife's family going through the grief that they went through, and I see a lot of my friends, and I lost a lot of friends through grief. I lost my best friend over last winter. I lost my best friend that lost his family, and he ended up on the streets. He ended up grieving. It affected him so much, and I think one of the biggest things is help these people. Reach out to them if you know what they're going through. Try and understand what brought them to that state of addiction, or wherever they are. That anger that's inside of them. Try and help them to realize that their emotions and everything, and what they're going through is absolutely allowed. It's absolutely okay to be where they're at, and just help them get through it because we're losing a lot of people. And like you said, and a lot of it is through suicide, through drugs, through everything. My baby sister, she was so devastated. She was so devastated from the loss of my dad. I remember because I was actually doing drugs with her at one time. I remember her saying, "You know what? I just wanna be with dad now. I hate being like this, you know." And my baby sister was crying out at that time, and I was lost at that time too. And I didn't reach out to her, and it hurts because I knew what she was going through, and we don't want to see this around our people, around our loved ones, And the biggest thing I want out there is we need to learn to accept grief for what it is, and it's a painful, long lasting, lifetime probably emotion, feeling, whatever it is that grief is, that we need to acknowledge it as being an everyday part of life, just like we acknowledge death to be an everyday thing in life.
Yeah,
Well, grief stays with us,
yeah,
and it's something that I seen my baby sister go through grief, and it took her life. And I seen my middle sister, the loss of my parents, get her so sick that she believed she was always sick. And she wanted to die to join them. And my baby sister, too. That's such an ugly place to be, and that's why I always thought my grief was okay because I wasn't going through that, but I was actually going through grief. I ended up in an addiction. I lost a lot of stuff going through things. Grief eats up people. Grief, the loss of a family. I say this to a lot of young men when they're going through breakups. The worst thing a man can go through, and this is what I strongly believe, and it's a part of my grief that I went through, is losing your family. My first marriage took a lot out of me. I was 2.5 years of straight alcohol and coke in my life, and I pretended that I was okay, and I wasn't. I really grieved the loss of my family too.
yeah,
It's the hardest thing a man can go through. And I can't say for a woman, I've never really heard a woman's story. I've never heard what a woman goes through, but grief affects us in all ways, like in all reality. And I'm not kidding. Like within the emotion, you see what I'm wearing today, my J's. My Jays lose today. I'm gonna be in grief tomorrow. That's how deep I am into my team. That's grief. I'm acknowledging it now because I know how I'm gonna feel if we don't get through this round. Like anything. Grief comes in anything, right? It's loss of parent, loss of a family.
yeah,
The breakup of a family.
yeah,
All those things affect us, and you see it if you look at it. What were these people like before to where they are today? And you see a lot of our people are lost in addiction or lost somewhere, or they become more of an angry person inside,
yeah,
even if it's not. Like it's there, and we have to acknowledge it for what it is. It's every day living with it.
yeah.
I guess that's what I want out there. That's what I want people to understand with grief, and how I deal with it. And if it helps somebody, I acknowledge that, and there's so much more. Shame and guilt is something that maybe it's another podcast for us.
Yeah, shame and guilt. Let's do it. We'll unpack those. But something that I was thinking of when you were talking, I just heard this term recently, slow suicide. And I don't know if you've ever heard that, where, we understand suicide, where, sometimes people will do the act and it'll be quite violent and it'll be instantaneous. But slow suicide is where people, especially with addictions, they
Hmm.
have, gotten to the point where they don't care if they live or die and they just continue this addiction until it eventually kills them. And so, they had lost that will to live, and the addiction took over, and they almost welcomed death, right? And so this was something that I just heard of, and I thought, geez, I definitely know, and I have a lot of family that the same thing, they got so lost in addiction, and their addiction eventually killed them, right? And
Hmm.
so I think that's something that we need to acknowledge and recognize, and of course, when somebody's in their active addiction, that's definitely something that you mentioned, that we need to offer support and, reach out and help them know that they're loved and, and supported, and, do our best. Of course, at the end of the day, people have to do the work themselves, through addiction and through grieving, but they can always know that they're loved and supported. And I think, as long as people know that, and as you were talking, I thought of a friend of mine. She recently lost a family member, and I had a dream about her last night, and she was crying. She was really struggling hard, and as you were talking, I thought, I think I should reach out to her today and see how she's doing, because we're given those dreams and stuff for a reason, and so maybe she's needing some love and support, and I think that's what I'll do after this podcast is over. But I thank you so much, my friend, and we'll book that podcast for shame and guilt. I would love to have another talk and unpack some more stuff with you, and that's why I wanted to have you on this podcast, because I know our talks can be really deep and really intense, because you're somebody who has been doing that work, and you're tapping into your emotions, you're tapping into your vulnerable side, and I really commend you for that. It's not easy, and you're being a trailblazer for a lot of men, and I think that's really amazing. I think a lot of men really need to listen to this and to understand that maybe they've been struggling, but maybe there's something they can do, and maybe they can turn things around without having to sacrifice their life for it. I think that they
Hmm.
can do something amazing with their life that they still have. And so I really encourage people to share this podcast. If you know anybody who has lost somebody recently, or even 35 years ago, like Dean said, it can still be affecting somebody. And so the best we can do is support people. So thank you so much, Dean. I know you'll be back. We have more we got to do. So take care, everybody, and thank you so much, Dean. All right, take care, my friend. We stay.
Yes, be back.